Hey everyone, welcome back to the Cypher Guide series. This time we have a guide on Breeze, and this one has actually been requested for a while now, so I thought I would get into it now. But for those of you guys who haven't seen this series before, this guide is going to cover first round buys, how to defend on both A and B site, as well as how to attack on both of those sites. But without further ado, let's get into it. So for first round buys, I recommend the very default buy on attack, being a cage and a tripwire along with a ghost. Usually I add frenzy to that list, but since most of your fights will be long ranged, I do not recommend frenzy in any case. But moving over to defense, you have one of two choices for buys. The first one being the same buy I just showed you for attack, and your second option being all of your utility with a classic at the side. Since on Breeze, there's a lot of places the enemies can try to lurk, and having extra tripwires in the first round can help you gather more info for your team and even help you win the first round more often. So depending on which route you want to go, you can pick one of these two buys. So this is actually my favorite setup on B site, and I'm going to show you why right now. So beginning with the camera, you want to do a jump throw up here until you get a cam something like this, which allows you to see into all of the tunnel, as well as the entrance of B main and all of site itself, which is super useful. But for the tripwires, you want to place a trip right here, which is actually really powerful since it's really hard for the enemies to break it without hitting it first, as you can tell. But then you want to throw a cage on top of it like this, and then you want to head towards mid and go under this light right here, somewhere around here, and then throw a cage like this. It doesn't have to be too specific, you'll get it down pretty fast. And then you want to place a tripwire, make sure it's past or right on top of this box entrance so they can't just jump over it. But then the way you're going to actually play this, you're going to want to go back site right here and play off of your cam. And then if you notice the enemies are pushing B main or about to hit your trip, you activate this cage and kill anyone who hits your trips. If you notice the enemies are going mid, you can pop this cage when they hit your trip, and you have a really nice one-way for mid. For anyone who's played Breeze, you've probably noticed a lot of Vipers on the enemy team, and this is where you're going to use their wall to your advantage. Beginning with the camera, you're going to want to go in the same spot as before, and then do a jump throw until you get a cam like this, which allows you to see into the entrance of B main, all of site itself, and when the enemies are pushing out of tunnel. So the first trip you want to place a trip right here, as well as another trip about right here. And then you're going to want to play this behind this wall right here. And usually the Viper wall is along this line right here. So you're going to be preparing for that. But if there happens to be no Viper on enemy team, you can actually just do a simple cage right here, which is just as effective. So when you notice the enemies are pushing out, you activate your cage or use the Viper wall and kill anyone who's trying to push on site. Moving into my third setup, which is another one of my personal favorites. You want to begin with the same cam that I showed before, being this one above, which sees the entrance of B main, all of site itself, and more specifically, when the enemies are pushing B tunnel, which I'm going to explain why that's useful in a minute. But first, I want to show you the trips, being one right here, as well as another one on the stairs right here, and then you want to throw a cage on top right here. So the reason that this cam is really useful for mid is that when you're standing in this position, you're very vulnerable to mid, and having that info can tell you when the enemies are pushing you, or actually can tell you when to peek. But if the enemies actually push where you want them to, which is B main, you can activate this cage when they're pushing up, and you can kill anyone who hits your trips. As for the final setup I know on B site, this one is still really fun to use, but it is not as strong as the other ones. Beginning with the camera, you want to place the cam I showed initially, being this one right here, which allows you to see all of site itself, all of tunnel, and the entrance of B main. Beginning with the tripwires, you're going to want to place a trip right here, as well as another trip around right here. and then you want to throw a cage right here. When you notice the enemies are beginning to push out of B main, you want to activate this cage right here. And then if you notice they hit your trip behind this wall, you can actually wall bang that person. And while your cage is still up, if they end up hitting this trip right here, you can kill them as well. So I wanted to begin my A site setups with the most classic Cypher setup you can do on Breeze. Beginning with the camera, you want to get into this corner as close as you can without falling and do a jump throw right here until you get a cam something like this. This cam allows you to see all of A site itself and when the enemies are pushing out on the pyramids, as well as when the enemies are beginning to push out doors. So moving on to the trips, you want to place your first trip right here, as well as another trip right here. A skydog might be a problem for these trips, but if they are, you probably don't want to do this tripwire setup. Then you want to throw your first cage right here, and if you really want, and you don't want the enemies to know where you're shooting from, you can throw another cage right here, so they're not too sure, and then you want to play in this corner right here. When you hear the enemies are starting to push out onto site, you activate one or both of your cages, and kill anyone who hits your trips. And the nice thing about this setup is instead of leaving yourself vulnerable, before the cage falls, you can actually run behind pyramids and start playing with your team. My second setup on A site actually uses the same cam that I just showed, being this one right here. And then you want to place your first tripwire around right here, which is actually really useful to watch mid, since it's actually really hard for the enemies to break this without first hitting it. Then you want to throw your second tripwire against this wall, like around right here. And then you want to throw your cage right about here. So when you notice the enemies are either pushing doors or pushing site itself, you want to activate this cage right here.
Cage triggered.
And kill anyone who hits this trip. And if anyone hits your mid trip, you can easily kill them as well. My final setup on A site finally uses a different camera, and it requires you to go on top of this crate right here and do a jump throw until you get a cam like that. This cam allows you to see the entrance of A shop as well as the entrance of mid doors, which is really useful. But the issue with this cam is that it's very easily visible, which means it's going to get broken pretty fast. But that's alright since it already gave you the info you need. Then you want to place your first tripwire right here, as well as your second trip around right here. Then you want to place one cage right here, and if you're really feeling like you don't want to get shot through your cage after, you can throw a cage right here as well. So the way this actually works, you want to play this behind pyramids, and if you notice the enemies are pushing A main, if you couldn't tell, this is a very big gamble on if you think they're going A main. But if you notice they're pushing it, you activate one or both of your cages, kill anyone who hits your trips, and if you want, you can actually go behind pyramids again into safety. Moving on to attack B site, you actually cannot watch flank with both of your trips even, but if you want to put a trip flank, you can actually put one right here, as well as if you want to watch elbow, which can be really useful, you can put another trip right here after the round starts. But when it comes to actually pushing up, I recommend throwing a cam right here, which allows you to check close corners and if anyone's peeking, like anywhere around site, which gives you a lot of info on where the enemies could be. When you actually begin to push up with your team though, I recommend just throwing a cage right around here so that you can actually push site in a much easier way with your team and make space in a much easier manner. When it comes to pushing A site, there's only one flank trip you'll ever need, and it's this one right here. Since it's actually really difficult for the enemies to break, they'll most likely hit it, but either way it'll still give you info. But when it comes to actually pushing up on A site, I would recommend just throwing a cam something like this to check if there's any like people playing close, or if anyone's peeking near pyramids or back site, or even just anywhere on site really, it can be useful. But when it comes to actually pushing up site itself, you want to throw a cage around right here, since it blocks one entire angle that you have to watch. and can make clearing sight a lot easier for you and your team. So I thought it could be cool to show this last little like one way I have, but it doesn't have a lot of use unless you know they're gonna go mid. So you want to first place your trip right here with a cage. Very simple to throw, just up in this corner right here. The reason this isn't so good is that since you can't watch a lot of angles from this place, but if you know they're gonna push mid, you play back here, and when you notice the enemies hit your trip, you activate this cage. And you have a really nice way to stop the mid push. Thank you everyone for watching this Cypher guide on Breeze. I hope you learned some kind of new setup or something new on Cypher. But I just wanted to mention that in the future I have some really insane Cypher guides coming that I'm not going to mention what they are yet, but just be prepared for it. But for right now, see ya.